Hi. I've noted in my books on Elon Musk, especially in the Elon Musk method, that Elon is an intensely curious person, and that is one of his superpowers. And curious people don't tend to come to conclusions where they're absolute and that they can't be swayed in other ways. And that becomes a superpower also because it allows for great creativity. That's one of the big things I talk about in the Elon Musk method. If you haven't read it yet, you might find it very interesting. But today, I want to talk later at the very end. I'm going to talk about one thing that Elon Musk has said that he's still completely undecided about. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. This is Randy Kirk. If you think this idea is going to be valuable to you, you can hit like now, or you can wait until later. Maybe you'll decide later to hit the like button. The like button helps me with the algorithm, and it also tells me that you like the content and maybe you'd like to see more just like it. And then hit, of course, subscribe and notify. And then I'm looking for more folks to join Patreon, which helps to pay for what I do here. All right. I want to start out by taking a hard look at science. And I think I'm going to say some things about science that you've never heard before and never thought about with regard to science. I have been pursuing science since I was 6 years old. My best friend and I used to spend countless hours in the creek looking at different kinds of rocks and finding arrowheads back in St. Louis, and also catching butterflies and other animals and snakes and lizards and everything else. But we would actually build terrariums, and I mean, we were naturalists. We really were. I was a member of the Audubon Society by the time I was 7, and I'm a terrible artist, but the one thing I could draw okay was birds. So this has always been something I've been terribly interested in, and it's continued throughout my life. My dad was an engineer, an electrical engineer, and there was always some kind of science experiment going in our basement. So that's kind of a little history about me. I ended up not pursuing any of the hard sciences, but I got my BS in psychology. I guess that would cause you to say that I guess I'm a scientist in a way. Anyway, in the course of my studying the sciences in my teens and 20s, I decided that Darwin was right, but it took a bunch of convincing because there were a lot of stuff that was standing in the way of thinking that Darwin was right. And one of the biggest things probably was that there was no continuing changes in species. There was no completely new species arising. There was no complete new categories of animals just arising out of nowhere. There was no fish that were half fish and half land animals. And it was just, there was some questions that I had. And so slowly but surely, as I was going through high school and college, those issues were all answered for me. And I wanted to go through those with you very quickly. For most of you, you weren't in school when I was in school. And so some of these things you won't even know what I'm talking about, but listen carefully. So one of the first things that happened was something called Piltdown Man. Now, you can look that up. It's all over the internet. You can read the whole history of Piltdown Man. But this was a scientist discovered this skull, and the skull seemed to have been like half ape and half man. And it really seemed to have characteristics of both. And it became a huge scientific find. Everybody was talking about it. It was making headlines in the papers. It was that kind of a deal. Well, you may or may not know that Piltdown Man turned out to be a complete fraud. But at the time, it helped a lot of people like me for a few years while Piltdown Man was in the headlines, helped people to say, oh, well, maybe but Darwin must be true. And here's evidence that we were looking for. And unfortunately, it just wasn't true. Until the 70s, I forget exactly when Piltdown Man was determined to be a fraud, but it was well into the 70s, I think, before that happened. So that kind of started me as part of my trip to believing in Darwinism. And then later on, as you can imagine, it kind of hurt my theory with regard to Darwin, because as of today, I still don't see things I don't see new animals that didn't exist 10,000 years ago that exist now. I don't see animals that are half this and half something else. Lots of speciation, of course. I mean, within species, you see But that's been true for, man has known about that for thousands of years and has created livestock and other things based on the fact that they realize that within species and within specific animal groups or plant groups or whatever, you could create a better strain. Anyway, that was number one. Number two was the primordial pool. Maybe again, you may not have heard of the primordial pool, but for a lot of the 20th century, everybody believed that, not everybody, but science believed that if you got the right kinds of chemicals, put them into a pool of water, and then hit it with electricity or created some kind of other energy, that you could create life from non-life. Millions of experiments, I don't know, thousands, who knows how many experiments were tried. The primordial pool continues to be something that some scientists believe will eventually get us to life from non-life. But so far, there's nothing. I mean, there's literally nothing out there that's telling us that we're going to get from non-life to life. But again, as a young man in my teens and 20s, it was like, okay, the primordial pool, that helps me to understand how all of this could have happened. And then later on, no, that wasn't going to be it. And today we have nothing, zero. I mean, there's nothing even in the beginning phases of causing us to believe that we understand how life comes from not life. Then there was the big one, survival of the fittest. I mean, survival of the fittest made so much sense. Bigger animals, stronger animals, smarter animals would either attract more mates, or they would kill off the weaker ones. And because they'd be stronger, they would meet with stronger mates, make more babies with stronger mates, and that would make better and better, and et cetera, et cetera. It was all great. And everybody, it kind of went beyond theory. That was kind of the law. It was kind of a law for most of the 19th and 20th century. People believed that survival of the fittest was a thing. In fact, so much so that we had something called, we had eugenics, which again, you may not be familiar with eugenics, but look up eugenics. This was something that a lot of university elites believed from the beginning of from the end of the 19th century, well into the 20th century. An awful lot of people believed, including the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, believed that it was a good idea to somehow reduce the number of babies that were being born to people who were brown or black or who had a family history of criminology, criminal behavior, or who had a family history of mental illness, and that you wanted to sterilize these adults so they couldn't have more children. And some people believed, there was some guy called Hitler or something, he believed you should just kill people that you thought were inferior races so that you could build a master race. And this all came out of eugenics, which was a variation of the theory of the survival of the fittest. Well, now I think we know, at least it's no longer believed that the survival of the fittest takes place. We have a new theory, which is something about survival based on the combination of all of the elements that are in the niche, if you will, for any particular animal or life that's out there. And that the complications of determining whether it's brains or brawn or the right flora and fauna, the right temperature at a given time. I mean, there's so many elements that can go into the explanation for what survives and what doesn't, that it would take computers like we have today. Maybe eventually we'll start to be as good at this as we are now at figuring out what the temperature is going to be tomorrow, which isn't still that great. But anyway, so as it turns out, survival of the fittest, which was the third pillar in my belief that Darwinism was true, that one turned out not to be so great too. And it caused an awful lot of problems for the world in the 20th century. Let's talk about chimps to human. The picture, it wasn't so much because Darwin had talked in the 18th century about that humans were a derivative. They were, evolutionary turning of events. We went from chimps and then to some kind of apes and larger apes, and then apes that kind of stood up, and then early man, and et cetera, et cetera. And then Time magazine put out this picture showing this variation, which I think will be on your screen. You've probably seen this picture. It became so famous overnight, and everybody believed it. I mean, I don't know everybody, but lots of people believed that that made so much sense. It just looked good, and it was easy to remember. And it was like, okay, I can see how that could have happened. And the result of all of that was, well, no, it's just not true. That isn't how the family tree worked out. We can't make the linkages. And it may be, well, anyway, there's a billion reasons why that's not true, and the picture was wrong. In terms of the family of humanoids with regard to other families of primates, the linkages are just not clear at all. And so that was another link. That was a big one because it was so clear and so easy to see. Well, anyway, that kind of leads to the last one. It was my fifth one. And on this one, it was called Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny. Now, again, you might not have heard of this. It's now called recapitulation theory, but back then it was Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny. I really liked this because it was onomatopoeic. You had to sit down there and study it to learn how to spell it. And so as a high school or a young college student, I can't remember which, I really went to a lot of trouble to get the pronunciation down, to be able to say it well, and then to be able to spell it so I could get a good grade on my test. Well, so ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny was the idea that if you watch the development of a human from the sperm all the way into a baby, you see it goes through these steps, and some of the steps look like a fish. Some of those steps look like a tadpole. I guess maybe some of those steps must have looked like a little bird. I don't know. And then they look like, starting to look more like a frog. And I don't know, a little mammal. Anyway, you can see as the process went along that maybe this was how evolution happened, was that basically as we evolved, we still had all of these predecessors that were contained in our development in the womb. Well, this was huge. It wasn't until 1960. Yes, I think the 60s or 70s, must have been the 70s, that this started to lose a lot of folks. It came from the end of the 19th century, and it went all the way through, I think, into the 70s and 80s before people started saying, no, this just isn't so. And we got more and more sophisticated, and it wasn't so. But for me, as a late teenager, early 20s, it was like, man, that made so much sense. Oh my gosh, now I can understand. This Darwinism thing is just amazing. I can just believe the whole thing. Well, okay, so no, it wasn't true. And that was my fifth pillar. So now all five of the pillars that had caused me to think that Darwinism was the way things worked were gone, and there was nothing to replace them. So there was no life from non-life. There was no new species. There was no new animals, coming to life out of nowhere. There was no Piltdown man, and there was no Piltdown dog, and there was no Piltdown frog, and there was no other things that were kind of half this and half something else. Anyway, I just slowly but surely thought, well, there are aspects of Darwinism that we've learned from. It was great that he came along and created this, because as a result of the science that we got out of that, now we can make all kinds of predictions and make all kinds of statements about how humans act, and it helped in certain medical situations and understanding the brain and so many other things. It's just as of now, it's just kind of the theory that a lot of people today still think it's just a fact. Well, no, it's not a fact. And the tenets, the basic pillars of it, have all gone away, and there's nothing to replace them. So anyway, that's kind of my journey. And I went from not believing it to believing it, and then not believing it again, because I'm a curious guy and I like to stay wide open. And if any of what I just said made no sense to you, hey, hit it in the comments. Please tell me in the comments what I got wrong. I'd love to know, but don't just get into some debate about whether God exists or doesn't exist, or whether Jesus is the Messiah. I'm not interested in any of that. I mean, I'm interested in it. I've got a whole website about it called the God versus No God.blogspot.com website. You could look that up, and you could go on there and argue till your heart's content. I'm not really interested in doing that here. what I'm interested in here is, was there something that I said that was wrong about those 5 pillars? Are some of them still true? Are they still good theories? Are they still factual? Is there anything that's replaced any of those things with new science where we can go, yeah, exactly, there you go. That's something that Randy would convince him. I'd love to know, please, in the comments. Okay, now I want to talk about a couple of other things that were also kind of related in that same period of time. There was the theory of the universe. So when I first started trying to understand the theory of the universe, we had what was called the theory that was a steady state universe. All the stars were already out there at the beginning of time, I guess. So it's kind of they just appeared, or they were there for all time. I don't know, but anyway, they weren't expanding. They weren't going further away from each other. They weren't contracting. They were just there, and there was no new ones being made or old ones being destroyed. I think, but anyway, it's called the steady state universe. Then we got into the various yo-yo universes. So there was the universe that was forever expanding, forever. It was always going to be expanding. And then we had the one that was expanding out, and it would get so far, and then it would begin to contract in. And I think there's some folks that still think that that's true in kind of the idea of the Big Bang, that the Big Bang explodes, the universe goes out, it gets to a certain point, then it contracts and goes back down into whatever that small, dense piece of matter is that begins it all. And then there was also kind of a circular theory of the universe. I never really totally understood that one. I think it was based on not taking time into consideration, that it was kind of an eternity, almost like an eternity that you would think of philosophically, but the real thing, an eternal circular universe where time was not part of the equation. All right. Those things, we have the Big Bang Theory today. I don't think the Big Bang Theory didn't arrive until 1960. I mean, people talked about something like that before 1960. This is a 63-year-old theory. It is based on math and some telescopic radiation that we can see. I don't think that it has, people treat it like fact. I don't know why people treat it like fact. It's not fact, it's theory, and it's only 63 years old. And I'm not sure that it's any better than the steady state or the yo-yo. Anyway, all right, let's move on. I have some questions for you. If you've stayed with me this far, I have a set of questions. I've been developing these my entire life, and it's just a set of questions, and maybe you can help me with these. Number one is, why do women have a hymen? I'm just curious. Other species don't. Other primates don't. Human women have a hymen. What's the biological benefit? Why would women have developed this in terms of a Darwinistic theory, even within the species? Why would women have done better because they had it? Why would they have ever had something like that to begin with, so that some women would and some women wouldn't, and the ones that had it would do better? It makes no sense to me. So what is the hymen's purpose other than to determine who is a virgin and who isn't a virgin? Tell me about another reason for its existence and why it would be a benefit that would have been kept in the species. But one theory would be that it's there because God wanted it to be there. That would be, a possible theory. Anyway, then there's the mystery of Jerusalem. I did a little extra reading just now, but I've been talking about this for years. It's like, okay, there's this little tiny city. It's 100 acres. It's the size of Disneyland in Anaheim. Maybe, I guess, same size as the one in Florida. Or maybe maybe all of them are 100 acres. So that's the size of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is part of Israel, and Israel is about the size of New Jersey, I think. If I remember that correctly. It's a little tiny country, little tiny walled city. And it has basically been the center of civilization's entire march for at least half of the time that humans have been civilized. and maybe longer. And some people say, well, there was another major civilization taking place in China, but there was even some, anyway, let's just leave it that China might have had a separate thing going on, and Jerusalem was just from Russia and the Middle East and Africa and all of Europe and eventually the United States. Anyway, and now, of course, China is invested because it's the fastest growing Christian community in the world. And so, anyway, I'm trying to figure out why Jerusalem? How in the world did Jerusalem become the place where the three major religions started? Why did Jerusalem become the place where Jesus was born? And whatever you think about Jesus, historically, he's the most important human who's ever lived. Historically, been more written about him, more art about him, more buildings built in honor of him, more even the Muslims and the Jews recognize him as either a great teacher or as a Messiah or as not a Messiah. Anyway, why Jerusalem? It seems odd. It just seems like there are no coincidences in science, right? We're talking science here. I'm trying to stay within science. So scientifically, why Jerusalem? There are no coincidences, and there is a science of history, and there is a science of sociology and anthropology. All these sciences, have to do with why Jerusalem. I can't figure it out, except it was intended by God. That's the only thing. That's the simple explanation. All right, let's go on to the mystery of the Bible itself. The Bible, by far the most sold, most published, product in history, created by, I forget, 40 different people, 60, 88, 80. I've forgotten some of my stuff from Bible school. There's a bunch of chapters. There's a bunch of books. These books create one consistent whole. It's like reading a novel. If you read it from cover to cover, it contains pretty much every single kind of literature known to man. We haven't really discovered any clear-cut new types of literature since the Bible. And people who study the Bible from a literary standpoint say it's the greatest piece of literature ever created. It uses almost every kind of device in terms of creating a story. We haven't really come up with new devices for creating stories since the Bible. It's got one story in it, and the story is kind of coincidental for all of the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians in the Old Testament, and then it splits off in the New Testament. And then the New Testament and the Old Testament combined to become the basis of the way that we govern now in the West, the concept of capitalism, the concept that people have purpose, the concept that we're all created equal, the concept that women are equal to men, the concept that slavery shouldn't exist because we're all equal, and so nobody should enslave somebody else. And some guy in England a few years ago was the first guy in history to ever kind of say that out loud, and then kind of, the English kind of destroyed slavery in the Western world. Anyway, I don't get it. The Bible, mystery of the Bible. Why the Bible? Where did it come from? Why were all the people who happen to have written in the Bible so smart? And then there's two more. You've heard these before. I know I said I wasn't going to go to things that were something you haven't heard before, but where does love and beauty come from? So love, everybody's talked about this philosophically. Why love? Why do people sacrifice? Why do they do sacrificial love? Why do they do sacrificial love with people they don't know? What's going on with all of that? How does love happen? Is it really truly just chemistry, predetermined? Well, nobody acts like that. If it's true that it's all chemistry and it's all predetermined, is that how you fell in love? No. Did you believe it at the time? Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you did. Okay. And then beauty. Why are things beautiful to humans? Why is our ocean views and mountain views and snow settings and certain colors and certain birds, and we kind of all agree across all civilization on what's beautiful and what's not, and we have color retina, we have disability. Well, why did we need all that for beauty? Why are all this beautiful stuff out there? What's the reason for it? Why do we have a canopy of stars? at night that cause awe. I don't know. Okay, so there you are. There's my questions, and I'd love to hear your comment. Let's talk about Elon. So Elon is this curious guy, and he's a curious guy, and he's still open. And because he's still open, he ends up being somebody who invents a lot of stuff because his curiosity causes him to want to see how far he can push in some of these directions. And so all of this is good. And it as I mentioned in the Elon Musk method, it is a superpower for him. All right. Well, he famously said on the Babylon Bee that he thinks the teachings of Jesus Christ are solid. And he gave some examples of what he believes about that. He said he's read the Bible. He thinks Revelation was a great ending. He then went on to say that if Jesus is saving people, he would not stand in Jesus's way. That's good. That's good. And that he would like to be saved. It didn't mean that people in the Babylon Bee and some other people said, well, that means Elon is saved. He accepted the offer there on the show. I don't think that's true, but I can't say. I don't know who's saved and who isn't saved, but it showed Elon's being open, willingness to consider, to contemplate, to think about things that are outside of, he said, I don't understand the universe. He says, there's tons of stuff we don't know about the universe. He said that on that show and on other shows. He doesn't know. Either do you, either do I. We don't know. We don't know. We have no idea. So I think Elon continues to research. I think I continue to research. I am a believer. I'll tell you right now, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I'll be in church while you're watching this, if you watch it on Sunday morning in California time. But there's a lot of stuff that even at my ancient age, I know I don't have all the wisdom, not a chance. I have a lot to learn, and I try to learn all the time. I try to stay curious and open so that I can become better and better and find out more and more interesting things to talk to you about. And it's been great talking about this with you today.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.